A few days ago, someone out there commented on one of my videos and reminded me about the CIA papers and Tartaria. And so I went down the rabbit hole to just see what I could find. And I've decided to make an entire another segment that will be several videos of Tartarian Tales, the CIA edition. So let's see what we can find here. I found a few different things. I'll find some of the links. I saved a lot of the files, but sometimes I lost the links for some, sadly. But there's a few different sections that I cut out at first, and then there was one particular email with a letter warning about communism in the 1950s in Ukraine. And that I'll end with that, and that is phenomenal because so much of this has to do with what's happening today. But let's dive back in here and see what we can find and what the CIA says and mentioned in some of their papers that were released by FOIA documents and have the search term Tartaria in them. So here we go. Resettlement of nationalities. So there was many of these, or several of them. And this one said in 1944 there had been a resettlement of Crimean Tartars and Kalmyks. And so I'm not exactly sure the role of the CIA, the connection with the Soviets, the connection with the Chinese and communism, but you will see a connection with all of them. And it makes me think a lot of different things about the past, and you realize that, God, everything you've been taught about history in America and everywhere else is just totally wrong and rewritten strategically. So this is Dulles, the chief of the CIA. He says this is pretty interesting. You guys read this on your own. Pause and read this. But it talks a lot about the way that just slaughters and just how you have to threaten people, basically manipulate court cases, manipulate trials to make fear into the hearts of the enemy in interesting ways, that you can tell a lot of the news stories are similar to that method. They still use it. What's real, what really happens in this world, and what's manipulated by the CIA. This one's pretty interesting as well. It was a little bit further. This was just a totally different document. Some of the other ones are together. But it mentions a few different senators at particular times. Whatever lies behind this strange story, it is clear that if the CIA had only thought to scratch its Russian, it would have found a Tartar. So there's inside jokes going on, and inside knowledge that is still hidden and is redacted. A Tartar in blank had been sentenced to 7 years of forced labor for being 26 minutes late to work. An admiral had been working on a kolkhoz and begged for some grain. His demand was refused, and the man stole 1.5 kilograms of rye, sentenced to 8 years of forced labor. And from what I gathered, a lot of these forced labor camps were in Siberia, and they would just come in and just conquer. They would just take over everything out of total fear, out of psychological warfare, in any way they could, convincing them of something great and then just stealing everything, looting everything, extreme violence, control of the peasantry. At the end of January 1949, the law established by the People's Councils was published. This law created quite an impression on the population by what they considered its aggression against all social classes, other than the agricultural and laboring proletariat. So even they, back then, were smart enough, even the enemy was smart enough to keep the people making the food. Nowadays, they're cutting off the food. This has a lot of similarities to today. And this is the 1940s, 50s, and those times that, in stories that you never hear about. During the same time, the people were preparing themselves for the collectivization of labor and of the land. The peasants were instructed many times by force as to the benefits of collected work. In this respect, there was much propaganda in regard to the benefits of using machinery. So they just inviting all these things in. The controllers of the entire world were just ramming their, what is this, an ancient process? What kind of process is this? What is the nature of this evil? And why do they fear so much things just playing out naturally, without evil manipulation? Why do they fear that so much? The reaction of this first phase of collectivism, when only a few suffered, is negative following the liquidation by the state of the estates, the homes, and the entire fortunes of the former landowners who had over 50 hectares of land, created quite an impression on many of the peasants. However, it was not great enough to bring about a revolt. So see, you get the poor to steal from the rich, and then it still didn't even work. These are tactics being used today on America 100%. One of the reasons why no one is complaining, even those who have lost everything, is fear. In every village, the leaders are constantly arrested. From every village, about 10 to 15 persons are taken to the Siguranta in Castanta, and some never return. Others who return never say anything because they are afraid. And I also read a letter in one of these things that was referring to someone who just goes to all these cities in Russia and everywhere over that area, where they just had concentration camps right in the middle, next to things, and no one would see because they'd go to the museums. The trusted people of the party and government in all these movements are loaned by the trade unions, which are dominated by the communists. And that is again what happens. They take over all the things, they underbid so that none of the people that should be doing, the locals, get the jobs. They still do this today, Australia and all over the world. The militia was created with the purpose of controlling that part of the population which did not follow the regime. So who knows if the militia in this country has been infiltrated and how much. Of course, these people, these three-letter agencies would try to do that and would definitely seek to do that, as they did in the past, as they will continue to do, unless something stops it someday, something ends the evil, which has been long overdue. City militia. On a whole, however, by the creation of the militia to replace the two old units, the number of communist tools in the executive field has increased. The militia is much larger than the gendarmerie and the police combined. By its creation, however, some of the old groups have been quietly liquidated, and in their places many other communists, including those who have recently become communists or those who have attended the communist schools, even briefly, have taken their places. Does that sound familiar in America? Are any of these politicians good anymore? Sidney Powell actually just came out and said they all need to go. Every one of them. They are all criminals. Sad, but true. The Plowmen's Front is not popular in the country. It is an artificial organization which is tolerated and maintained by the communists. So they just have so many different ways to infiltrate, and they do it for so long, and with money. You can bribe everybody with money, sadly, it seems. Not me, not a lot of people, I guess, but way too many. The communists carry out their activity methodically. They control everyone, whether members of their party or not, and such people lead their lives according to communist orders. The workers, clerks, all salary people, high school students, university students, children and women are forced to attend meetings. Meetings are held constantly in Bucharest and every bomb. There's more. There's so much more in this, but I took the highlighted segments, but this is it. This is how they do it. You know, did anyone really think that communism was gone or that we eradicated it back in the day, when the news organizations proclaiming it were controlled by them the whole time? Like, no. In addition to these street demonstrations, the party conducts its consolidation activity in every field and by all the means which it has. What a party, huh? It doesn't sound like any party I know. And it's kind of interesting that the word party is used in such different ways here. Like, a party is usually a good celebration to me, but not in this way. The entire day of each citizen is filled with communist activity. People have very little time to themselves. The workers are generally not satisfied but keep quiet. Too many promises have been made to them. Only about 66% of the workers have been made leaders, or they have been moved to the prefecture, the militia, or the cooperatives. They complain on every occasion when they can find someone, whatever they can trust. At times, some of the workers are bold and talk openly to anyone. Always they are worked to death and are forced to do the disposal of the party's work. Jeez. Until 1948, the Turks and Tartars in the Dobruja remained outside the communist organization, and at the elections gave proof of their attachment to the old regime and to Western democratic ideas. This is very important, and I think this is why their eradication must have occurred shortly after, and why no one's really heard of the Tartars, and they have an ancient history that was replaced with nonsense for so long, strategically by evil. The communists have not interfered with the Muslim religion in Romania since 1944. However, 5 muftis have been appointed in Constanta. Those were blank. Each one of these was replaced by an individual more active and more communistically inclined. The first mufti was not controlled by the communists, but the remaining have been their tools. So, do you think that still happens today? I'm not sure, but I wouldn't put it past them. No, this one's ridiculous. Popular attitude towards the government. A blank about the attitude of the Soviet people towards the government. The only thing that the Soviet citizen could be thankful for was the fact that he was alive. There were many things the Soviet citizen did not like. His life was entirely restricted to the party line. The peasant and worker class were bitter because of the low standard of living. Even if there were sufficient products on the market, the ordinary person did not have enough money to take advantage of them because of the prices. There was always a terrific shortage of living quarters. Common to have an entire family living in one room and share a kitchen with another. Although every citizen had the right to vote because of the Communist Party system, this was sheer mockery, kind of like America. People needed permission to change their place of employment. Nobody could have his own business. Soviet citizens were restricted in land purchases to 700 square meters. No one could openly criticize the government. Taxes were high, especially among workers. Consequently, many of the peasants did everything possible to leave the kolzokhi and take up employment in the factories. This was especially true of the village youth and demobilized sons of kolkhoz workers. There was much propaganda to stem the march from the farms to the cities. No one dared express his true views outside of his family and trusted friends. It was impossible to know the true attitude of the people. They could only accept conditions as they were and remain silent. Terrible. This is what they are slowly going towards. And COVID was the perfect way for them to get closer and closer, along with a completely stolen and terrible November 4th. Religion as a source of resistance. The church and other religious groups were not a source of resistance to the regime. Churches were well attended by the older generation and women, especially during holidays when the churches were overfilled. Yeah, that's probably since now I think they've weaponized that as well, many of the times. Thankfully, there are some true men of spirit that stay true to everything and don't fall for it. The regime's effect on youth. The Communist Party had been extremely successful in indoctrinating the youth of the USSR with communism. With the communist program in full force in primary schools and higher schools, nobody could escape any communist propaganda. Starting at a tender age, Soviet youth were taught that their life is the best in the world. They are also told that the people in America are starving to death, that there is widespread unemployment, that people are forced to sleep on benches and in parks, that Negroes are unmercifully exploited and beaten to death, and that the government of the U.S. existed in name only, the real guiding power being Wall Street. Since the young people have no opportunity to learn the actual facts, they accept this as the truth. And it's closer than anyone thinks, but who knows? The schools and just how they teach it, to like how they just design things for future events almost. It's like, wow, they definitely get together in their meetings and they plot exactly how to steer each country in a strategic way to make this machine function as an evil instead of the natural way it should and the people would want it to, where everyone truly does benefit, not the way they just exploit that hope and utopia for just hell. It's disgusting. Male censorship. Male entering or leaving the USSR was censored. I'm sure that is the case everywhere. America, all over the place. Email, it's all. Phone, text messages, nothing is private anymore. They just found so many more ways to be on top of it, and it's everywhere. We are at a war, and I hope we do something about it. But either way, here's another one I wanted to read. This will, again, hammer that point in that something's got to be done because things can get really bad really quick, like they did in the 1950s Ukraine. So check this out. It's actually pretty intense, pretty sad, and a definite warning that we got to straighten things out. So here we go. An open letter to Ukrainian emigres, and I believe this has a lot to do with where the Tartarians went and with the history. So here we go. Dear countrymen, cruel fate drove some of you a long time ago, others more recently, beyond the frontiers of your birthplace, the Ukraine. There are not many places left in this world which have not known Ukrainian wanderers. I feel your longing, your pain, and nostalgia for your fatherland. Accept this letter as a sincere greeting, bringing you the scented air of home fields. Accept these words as you would accept them from your own brother, who came to you through many great dangers to share with you his and your suffering, and to pour out from the bottom of his heart all the hopes of your brothers who in sweat, pain, and blood struggle for the freedom of our beloved mother Ukraine. Beloved brothers and sisters, you who are now in far-off foreign lands, I address you in your own tongue from the hearts and souls of the wide masses of your Ukrainian brothers from the mother country, Ukraine. My true Ukrainian conscience prompts me to write this appeal in the belief that every true Ukrainian patriot would not hesitate to sign it instead of the author. The sufferings which we now undergo in our own country have no equal in the history of the Ukraine. The Ukrainian peasant spends his miserable existence on a hunger diet in the accursed kolkhoz. The Ukrainian worker, also starving, exhausts his last ounce of strength in the mines of the Donbas, or in some equally hard work in various factories. The member of the Ukrainian intelligentsia has to deny his own soul, his open Ukrainian soul, and go down deep into himself, even beyond his national consciousness, or if he is abject and vile, to change into a Moscow soul. The Ukrainian woman has become a real slave of the socialist heaven. More black than the blackest soul, she sweats out her blood on the kolkhoz fields or deep down in the dark mines. The Ukrainian youth is being terrorized, depraved, and poisoned by the wise teachings and doctrines of Lenin and Stalin. Those of the young people who refuse to join the Komsomoli are thrown out of the schools. Even small children in elementary schools are not left in peace by the Moscow Bolshevik barbarians. They are being forced to join the Pioneer Organization. Teachers who refuse to organize Komsomoli or pioneer movements in their schools, and those who attend church services or wish to be married in church, are immediately dismissed from their posts. For some time now, there have been no decent priests left in the churches. They were either shot or deported to Siberia. Their place has been taken by obedient Bolshevik instruments. The people are still very pious, but there is nobody to speak to them of religion. The church is desecrated and exists only for propaganda purposes. In the Ukrainian towns, one cannot hear Ukrainian spoken. The intelligentsia speaks Russian. To speak Ukrainian is to draw suspicion on oneself of the mighty MGB and to find oneself in the most desolate spots of Siberia. But this is not all. The savage Moscow Bolshevik terror in the Ukraine knows no limit. No Ukrainian can be certain of tomorrow. No one here sleeps peacefully. At all hours of the night in the villages you can hear the shouting and cries of the people. If they do not arrest and deport people at once, the officials and his assistants turn everything upside down in the cottages or yards. All the various quotas of bread, meat, taxes, and rents are being ruthlessly collected at all times of the day and night. The Ukrainian people have been turned into beggars, and nobody is released from bond servitude, even the real beggars. Everybody has to be in a kolkhoz, which is run by the Bolsheviks. In return for their hard-working days, people receive a starvation diet. Exploitation of the Ukrainian peasantry in the kolkhozy has far surpassed the former serfdom on the land. In many cases, for a full working day, people received less than 300 grams of grain. Of course, there are a few kolkhozy in the Ukraine, especially reserved for visitors from abroad or from the so-called lands of the popular democracies. They are kept purely for propaganda purposes, and life there is much better. In the western Ukraine, the Bolsheviks have not yet succeeded in organizing the kolkhoz everywhere, and the exploitation and plunder of those villages which are still outside kolkhozy is beyond human endurance. For example, I can mention the village of Parachi, Stanislav Rayon, which consists of about 700 individual farms. In 1949, the village had to deliver 6,000 centners of grain, which of course meant hard grain. To this one had to add the forced purchase of grain by the state, as well as the proportional delivery of other crops, including hay and all sorts of fodder. In 1949, the same village had to pay 100,000 CRB in taxes. Other villages had to deliver proportionally the same amounts. But even that is not the full picture of the poverty and exploitation of the Ukrainian peasant. It is seldom that a peasant has more than one cow. In spite of this, he has to deliver a yearly quota of 250 liters of milk with a fat content of not less than 4%. Each farm has to deliver a yearly quota of 30 liters of milk per year. But you must not think one can be excused for any reason whatsoever from these deliveries. The quotas of bread, meat, milk, eggs, money, rates, and taxes must be paid and delivered in full. If they are not, heavy sentences follow. In the most lenient cases, heavy fines, but usually confiscation of property and several years in Siberia. The following is an example of one of many thousands of such cases. Peasant Mikhaila Lutaki from the village of Bondarev, Stanislav Rayon, had to deliver 38 centners of bread grain from all his farm of 7 hectares in the year 1947. After he had thrashed all his corn, he discovered that he could only deliver 30 centners, which would not even leave him any grain for sowing or anything to make his own bread. He tried to explain this and sent a petition asking to be released from the delivery of the remaining 8 centners of his quota, as he did not know where he could obtain it. It was all in vain. He was sentenced to 10 years of forced labor in Siberia for non-delivery of 8 centners of grain. Such things happen here every day. In 1949, the peasants were paid 5 KRB for 100 kilograms of rye, but 1 kilogram of rye bread in the state shops, there are no others, costs 1.90 KRB. Shoes for a 10-year-old are officially priced at 80 KRB. If a peasant has no milk, he has to deliver 10 kg of butter instead of the 250 liters of milk. For his butter, he receives 5.6 KRB per 1 kilogram. The very same day, if the peasant wishes to buy the same butter in the same shop, he has to pay 35 KRB for 1 kilogram. Every peasant has to work, sometimes several days in the forest for the government, often scores of kilometers away from his cottage. In order to avoid prison or Siberia, many peasants simply leave their homes and wander about. The authorities organize raids on villages to catch those who hide for fear of being arrested and deported. If any young people are caught, they are primarily sent to the Donbas mines, but some of them have been taken to China and made to join the Communist Army. Many letters have already been received from those who were forced to enlist in the Chinese Communist Army. On top of all this misery sits the Moscow Bolshevik bandit who sneers at the Ukrainian nation. Let me give you 1 or 2 examples. The peasants are made to deliver their bread grain quota to the ration centers in red wagons with bands playing at the head of the column. Is this not sheer mockery? The poor people curse and weep as they see their last piece of bread taken away from them by the Bolshevik bandits. Then these inhuman monsters write in all their papers about the great enthusiasm of the people who, with bands playing, deliver their bread quota to the state rayon centers. Or another picture. During October 1947, there was a mass deportation of peasants from the western Ukraine to Siberia. About 5 to 10% of the population was deported. The manner in which this was done closely resembled the Tartar invasion of Kiev in 1240. The Bolsheviks employed a special army which they brought from the east. They also used NKVD units and armed members of the administration. On the 21st of October 1947, during the night, all the cottages whose inhabitants were marked for deportation were surrounded by the military. Then all hell broke loose. Shots were fired, there was shouting, weeping, dogs barking, animals bleeding, orders being shouted by the Bolshevik bandits, and dead bodies of those who had the courage to resist. This is a picture, rather scanty and deficient in detail, of the 20th century's most democratic country in the world. To add to the misery, there was a heavy snowfall, and in the trucks which came to take them away, the barefooted and half-naked children, women, old men, and cripples were crying bitterly. But no tears or blood, there's many cases of suicide, would move the hearts of the peace-loving socialists. But no tears or blood would move the hearts of the peace-loving socialists. All that these unfortunate people who were being deported were allowed to take with them had to be packed into 1 small sack, at the most 2. However, nothing prevented those cynical Moscow Bolsheviks from writing on the heavily barred railway cars into which these unfortunates had been herded, voluntarily departure of Ukrainian peasants to the east, and at some stations they even had bands playing. Is that not all sheer mockery? Many children and old people perished on the way. Since we are talking about deportations, it must be mentioned that they are taking place even now, with the difference that they are not on such a large scale as before. People are being deported from individual villages, but this happens all the time, and the final result is the same. Either throw yourself at the stone, or throw the stone at yourself. There are villages today in the western Ukraine where 20% of the population has been deported to Siberia. Take as an example the village of Yamnitsa in Stanislav Rayon. The village originally numbered about 600 families, 200 of whom were deported to Siberia. 70 persons were arrested and imprisoned, and 200 were killed by the Bolsheviks. 180 of them died in the ranks of the UNA. There are many such villages in the Stanislav Rayon. Posich, Mayanek, Gutisha, where not even one family of the original inhabitants is left. People of these 3 villages were dispersed to various kolkhozy in the eastern Ukraine. From the end of 1949 until the time of this report, there had been a marked increase in terrorist activities, and as the kolkhozy spread, the people underwent superhuman sufferings. The founding of a kolkhoz in a village was usually preceded by arrests and deportations. This was done in order to frighten the people. If that was not enough and they still did not join the kolkhoz, a garrison was stationed there, usually composed of about 30 to 50 men picked from UD and MGB units, and thus the, quote, voluntary organization of the kolkhoz began. They arrested people and employed every means of terror known to the Bolsheviks as persuasion. They beat them up, pushed their fingers between doors and jammed them, locked them up in cellars full of water for several days without food in the middle of winter, until they agreed to sign a petition for the founding of the kolkhoz. One simply cannot imagine anything more cruel. The Inquisition of the Middle Ages was but child's play in comparison with the Bolshevik methods of organized terror. However, special treatment is reserved by the Bolsheviks for the Ukrainian underground, the OUN. By means of savage terror, the MGB mobilized a whole army of agents whose task is to watch and report every movement of the Ukrainian revolutionaries and insurgents. For every 2 to 3 villages, one official is appointed, ranging in rank from a lieutenant to a colonel, who generally has under him 10 to 30 men, real bad characters. At night, these men set traps and ambushes all over the country and in daytime raid suspected cottages. There are also some operational groups which are engaged in searching forests, hills, and fields. Apart from these methods, the Kremlin reptiles use all sorts of filthy propaganda to discredit the Ukrainian soldier in the eyes of the Ukrainian people. They have little success, however. The whole Ukrainian nation, with the exception of the Bolshevik hirelings, and there are not many of them, support wholeheartedly their sole protectors and defenders. The enemy is raging, as none of the insurgents will give himself up alive. Although there are many victims in this merciless and ruthless struggle, the moral strength of the Ukrainian insurgents is undiminished, and all over the Soviet Union the resounding voice of the Ukrainian revolution is being heard, whilst the Kremlin schemes with all the perfidy of a crooked mentality on how to stifle this ever-living voice of the Ukrainian spirit. This is only a mere outline of the tragic and at the same time heroic picture of the present Ukraine. Perhaps these few inadequate but sincere words will move the conscience of those of our brethren who, in foreign lands, fish in troubled waters of discord and quarrel or sink in the mire of Moscow Bolshevik propaganda. To all of you, dear brothers and sisters in faraway Canada, the United States, or in other parts of the world who have inhaled the poisonous vapors of Moscow communism, we give a sincere Ukrainian warning. See through it all and do not put more heavy burdens on the Ukrainian people through your collaboration with those who so cruelly oppress your own folk in your own land. If you do not believe us, come, if only for 1 hour, to your place of birth, your village or town, and talk frankly with your relations or close friends. They will open their hearts and tell you the truth. They will explain to you all about your masters. We believe that one bitter tear from their eyes will wash away from your souls all the Moscow Bolshevik poison. Do not talk, however, to the Bolshevik agitators or agents. They will never tell you the truth. If you are good Ukrainians, seek the truth certainly not among the Moscow Bolshevik hirelings, but rather amongst your own martyred nation, and you will find it in the blood and sacrifice of her great sons and fighters. We also appeal to you, dear brothers and sisters in the emigration, because you live in discord and quarrel with each other. Why should it be so? Are political convictions, party or territorial ambitions so much more important than the call of your Ukrainian blood, even more than the voice of fighters fallen for a free Ukraine, even more than the good cause of your fatherland? Are party ambitions or desire for power so strong that you will bring about a split in the national front? Answer me. The sufferings of millions of your brothers enslaved by the enemy, the tears of orphans, the agony of those tortured in prisons and those deported to the wilderness of Siberia, your own brothers and mothers, the insult to your history, tradition, national honor, and respect, do not all these things grieve your hearts? Is it not better to fill your hearts with hate and anger against the eternal oppressor than to nurse such anger in your hearts against your own flesh and blood because they have different political conceptions? O Ukrainians, Ukrainians, come to your senses. Did not our great leader, Ivan Mazepa, write, "There is no love, no agreement, beginning with yellow water. Through discord we lost all and helped to conquer ourselves." Is this not true? In the past as today, our quarrels and national divisions have been our greatest enemy. Where is your real patriotism? Even small nations, even various colonial peoples have achieved national independence. Even culturally backward people, some tribes, have united in the name of national interest. In we, where is our Ukrainian state? Why does the Ukrainian name not resound in the world as strongly as it should, as it is entitled to? In the name of all the blood shed by millions of fighters, in the name of the millions of oppressed brothers, in the name of the glorious Ukrainian past, in the name of the speedy creation of an independent, united Ukrainian state, we beg of all of you, in whose breasts beats a true Ukrainian heart, who hear the call of Ukrainian blood, to love your brother, give him your heart, help him in his need, and protect him. In the name of brotherly love, in the name of a free Ukraine, we ask you to hate our enemy, the savage Kremlin setup, the Moscow Bolshevik imperialism in all its dirt which has contaminated our Ukrainian hearts and souls. In the name of our great Ukrainian future, in the name of the real union of all brothers in all parts of the world, we ask you to rekindle in your hearts a mighty fire of hate and anger against the Moscow Bolshevik oppressor, who is also responsible for our national divisions. Once more, we appeal to you, all Ukrainians in the emigration, with the words of our great prophet Taras Shevchenko, unite and be brothers. We commiserate with you from the bottom of our hearts and sympathize with your difficulties in the emigration, but your troubles are very small in comparison with the tragedy and suffering of the Ukrainian nation at home. You must remember that your chances to work for the good of the Ukrainian cause are much bigger than ours here. I confess to you frankly that as I write this letter, I keep looking over my shoulder and I listen as to whether a Kremlin bandit is not sneaking up behind me with a knife. Death can be very sudden here. If you are really touched by the cruel fate of your own nation, you will do your best to help set her free. Remember that you did not leave your own country to save your lives, but rather to gain for the Ukraine abroad all that which it was impossible to achieve here in the clutches of the Kremlin vampire. Do not let even a moment pass without doing something for the cause. Remember that all the blood and suffering of our fighters and martyrs will fall on your conscience if you waste your time in party quarrels. We rejoice to learn good news from you, but on the other hand, every quarrel of yours is like the sharp point of a knife in our hearts. Remember that today the Ukraine passes through her greatest tragedy. Know that your nation today shows the greatest heroism in her history and in the history of the entire world. Here a ruthless fight is being waged for every Ukrainian soul. No day passes without a victim, and everywhere in our country heroic blood has been shed. You should be proud of your great nation, and by your devoted action, brotherly love, agreement, and solidarity, you should gain for your people respect and glory amongst the nations of the world. Every good deed of yours for the good of the cause makes us rejoice. Every despicable action of yours which stains the good name of the Ukraine fills our souls with fresh suffering. Dear brothers and sisters, accept these words not as an angry reproach, but rather as an expression of love from your own oppressed nation. I send to all dear Ukrainians abroad sincere greetings and love from the mother country. Signature deleted, May 1950. That is just an intensely heart-wrenching thing. I wonder who the author of that is, and how the CIA got their hands on it, or how it ended up here right now. But oh my God, so much similarities. The methods have changed and adapted with the technologies, but the process of mind control, of taking over a land, of eviscerating an entire history is just, it seems so easy now, and it's really sad that it seems so easy. Just imagine all the histories that have come and gone and been completely erased. Like, we still and may never know who made these buildings. They could be from any time. A civilization could have just been wiped out like nothing, and this evil force would just eviscerate all knowledge of it without any remorse. These people can just eliminate life. It's so easy for them to eliminate history and documents and structures and objects. It's not even close. If they can take down children and mothers and do all this disgusting, vile, just atrocities to people, this is like 70 years ago. And this happens a lot in countries around the world today, in countries with a lot of power. And this communist force has not gone anywhere. It's gone a little bit into hiding, maybe from the psyche of the masses, the collective, but it's still very, much a threat to every single one of us. And you can see from the control of information, like everything from those clips before, all those methods can be translated from the 40s to things that are happening now via tech, via spy systems, all these different things, all the control of the people, control of the politicians, control of who makes the laws, control of just manipulation of laws to make people think they have to obey, moving people into countries, moving people out of countries, destroying things. Now, I mean, weather weapons, there's so many different ways that this is all just continuously going down. And will it ever have an end? Like, when is it going to end? When will when will there be a time when the good can eliminate this force of just absolute filth? I pray that we can, because this is long overdue, and we can't have histories being done like this. We need to know where we're from. To progress truly as humans, we have to get a grasp of our history, of the potential within our world as in true science that can be used for good only. And we need to harness all these things and get rid of the people who think otherwise, and they can't be in control any longer. It's just too much. Too much is at stake. We've got a lot of great things. Our brothers and sisters all over the world. Let that letter be a warning, a message. We have to learn from the past, and this can happen so easily to people we will never even hear of, never pass on a book. There'll never be a history channel show on this Tartarian stuff. Like, it's really sad. And why so much hatred for the Tartarians? Why did this name just now start to come back into the public sphere, like when it's in all these books? They were a clear amazing part of history who had a lot of land, especially the theoretical land above the north. And there has got to be reasons why they're hiding this. One of the clips I saw connected the Goths to the Tartars, which would be very interesting, because Goth buildings, technology, that stuff is like from another dimension. So there's their true history, and just over time they suffered all these different things, these warring factions, people taking over, these evil forces and mentalities conquering and going back and forth. But to know kind of, get a glimpse that maybe all of that kind of ended in the 50s is just really, really tragic. And so we can't let that happen to us. Bless you all.